Yellow and Red Makes by Digits 27, Chapter 12. Naruto sat up in the highest branch in the tree, looking extremely bored as he lazily swung his back and forth. He hated reconnaissance missions with a passion, even A-ranked ones. It was always the same story. They would receive some interesting intelligence about enemy movements of suspicious activities, investigate, and find absolutely nothing. They were always sent on some wild goose chase or another. The only reason this particular mission was classified as A class was due to them observing a shinobi team who were supposed to be their allies. It wasn't like they were actually expecting anything interesting to happen while observing a team on a C rank mission. However, like always, Naruto just went with what he was told to do, albeit with no small amount of grumbling and complaining until Taiya knocked some sense into him. He looked around for his team, having difficulty picking them out from with his chakra sensing abilities, which was the idea, of course. In actuality, the only reason he could sniff them out at all was because of his familiarity with them. Gaara was deep underground, monitoring everything via vibrations in the ground that his sand relayed to him in a similar way to his third eye technique. Tajuya cloaked in a complicated genjutsu that weaved her presence into the natural background chakra. For his part, Naruto went with a more simplistic method, suppressing his own chakra to a point where he only had the bare minimum to survive. It had taken him a very long time to master this particular technique due to his massive reserve, but he had it to the point where only a very talented sensing ninja could detect him. The only problem was that he couldn't move quickly without giving away his position, as his body automatically sent chakra to his limbs when he did so. So that's how he sat, lazily waiting for the team they were observing while actively suppressing his chakra. He smirked as he sniffed the air and smelled the blood of the two chunin they had accidentally come across while scouting out the route the leaf shinobi would most likely take. From the bingo book, they were the Demon Brothers, and Naruto had made sure to keep them alive in order to collect the current ransom Kiri was offering for their capture. It was lucky that Naruto had noticed the noxious purple substance dripping off of the nasty shuriken chain the two had strung out between them. Otherwise, Toyo would probably be in some serious trouble. As it was, he had been able to grab said chain, making use of his inherent poison resistance. The two enemy ninja had been shocked by that long enough to be caught up in Kara's sand. Last Naruto had seen of them, they had been trapped in one of Takeyo's worst genjutsu. She wouldn't tell him the specifics, but from the look in her eyes, he knew it would be enough to keep them busy for a few days at least. He smirked again as he finally caught five unfamiliar scents entering into his sensory range. He alerted the others with a coded signal sent via taps to the trunk of his tree. Gaara would pick up on it and send on the signal to Tetsuya. For now, their only orders were to observe. However, being allies, they were given permission to intercept any hostiles if the other team was threatened beyond their abilities. Of course, this was only the case if they were sure it would not give away their primary mission. Naruto had first questioned the logic of sending them to spy on their allies, but the Kasakage had assured him that all shinobi villages kept secrets from one another, even allies. So here they were, spying on Leaf Shinobi to get an idea of how well their genin were trained. Naruto had been slightly worried when he had further read the bingo book and found who the Demon Brothers were associated with. Zabuza Mochi was hardly someone to be trifled with. Of course, that worry dissipated when he saw who the Jonin leader of the lead team was, an equally recognizable name from the bingo book. The copycat ninja of Konoha would be more than a match for the Demon of the Mist. He was suddenly made very alert as the sixth foreign signature entered his nose's scope. That wasn't right at all. Ninja teams comprised the three subordinates, their joining sensei, and an escort mission like this. And the clients, he once again relayed instructions to the team to be extra careful. The scent of first blood had just entered his scope. What he witnessed next would be a battle he would remember for a long time. Two extremely powerful Jonin going at it, both out for the other's blood. At first, it seemed like Momochi had the upper hand when he trapped Kakashi inside of a water prison jutsu, and Naruto was just ready to intervene. However, in a surprising display of teamwork, the two male genin of the team distracted Zabuza long enough for Kakashi to break out of his deadly technique. Finally, the fight swung in Konoha's favor, as in impressive display of as in an is in an impressive display of the Sharingan's abilities. Kakashi used Zabuza's own techniques against him. Not to file away that information for later. As far as he knew, there were currently two Sharingan users active. Both were high-level shinobi that were not under any circumstances to be underestimated. He had also noted that throughout the entire conflict, the female member of the team, under the guise of protecting the client, had done nothing to help her teammates. Finally, he was astounded as an unknown Kiri Hunter Nin appeared, completely to his surprise, and apparently to Kara's as well. If his message was anything to go on, whoever this person was, They were amazing at hiding their presence. While this was to be expected of a Hunter Nin, this person proved that they were not due to their strange behavior when handling Zabuza's body. From that moment on, Naruto kept his guard up. It meant that Zabuza was not dead, and now he had an extremely skilled accomplice. The next week was once again spent observing the Konoha team as their sensei recovered from their over usage of the Sharingan, another fact that Naruto filed away for later. The Genin spent their time training, and Naruto had nearly fell off the branch he was in when he found out they hadn't even begun tree climbing exercises. Granted, he had only begun under QB's instructions, but he lacked an actual sensei, so he just assumed it was basic ninja knowledge. To find out that wasn't the case cheered him up immediately, now rather proud with his team's abilities. If this was the rate that they learned that they learned at, then they might not even begin learning the kunai balancing exercises by the time they were ready for tuning, re, re, ready being used loosely. The week passed otherwise uneventfully, with the two male members of the team progressing slowly, while the previously useless pink-haired girl proved to be almost Toyo's equal when it came to chakra control. The entire week he had the oddest sense of familiarity when he looked at her whenever it was kept, how, but whatever it was, kept slipping away from him. Midweek, Naruto had a very strange encounter with somebody he immediately knew to be the fake Hunter Nin. He once again reaffirmed his beliefs that he was excellent at concealing his location and presence. He had found it odd just how feminine the boy looked and acted, and the two had an interesting conversation, with Naruto giving no impressions that he even knew who the boy was. His answer to the black-haired boy question left him smiling as he walked away, having finished collecting necessary herbs. Naruto was also left smiling. It was no mystery to him the gray that surrounded the shinobi profession. Most most were glorified mercenaries, just doing as they were paid. Few were inherently evil, merely carrying out the orders of their superiors, who in turn were carrying out the word of their paying clients. It was why Naruto couldn't bring himself to attack the other shinobi, despite their status as pseudo enemies. If they harbored no ill intent towards him, then he had no reason to get concerned. Finally, there was some excitement at the end of the week as Kakashi and Zabuza seemed to recover simultaneously and square off on the bridge. Unfortunately, this time his accomplice didn't stick to the wings. Instead, he engaged the single male genin that was presented directly as the kunoichi of the team, once again protected Kitazuna, as Nata had found he was called. Tagiyo was on her sleep rotation, so it was just him and Gara observing the fight, and what a fight they witnessed. The Uchiha managed to give the accomplished Shinobi run for his money as they fought back and forth across the bridge. Eventually, he was forced into using his equally impressive Genkai to subdue and not quiet the Sharingan user. Once again, once Kakashi had seen that his student had failed to beat the imposter continent, he started to fight Zabuza, a fight that equally the fight that equaled their last in display of skills. Finally, Kakashi gained the upper hand, and with an odd right-on move Naruto had never seen, he moved to finish it. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on the viewpoint of the various people present, the accomplished just managed to throw himself in front of the attack, taking Kakashi's lightning-infused hand straight through his heart. Naruto was tempted to go down and intervene, but it seemed useless by this point. Zabuza was finished. He had lost the use of both his arms, had a steady stream of blood coming from his mouth, and was limping heavily. He quickly lost consciousness from the extreme wear on his body. Kakashi wasn't much better off, and the combined use of his Sharingan and Chidori had taken away most of his chakra. That, coupled with the few wounds he had received from Zabuza's severed sword, left him in a weakened state. He was only able to stay conscious long enough to check that both Sasuke and Sakura were unconscious and not dead before promptly passing out himself. In a strange twist of events, Tazuna was the only one left standing, being left rather shocked at seeing only his second full-scale ninja fight. It was, of course, at that inappropriate moment that Gato, the antagonist of this entire confrontation, decided to show up with an army of thugs and opportunist bandits. He only looked amused by the carnage that his near destruction of the land of waves had caused. Naruto, by this point, was thoroughly frustrated, having no valid reason to intervene as long as the living ninja were not threatened in any way. His claw-like nails were digging into his palm in an effort to stop himself from simply jumping down and decapitating the cocky tycoon. Finally, a deep feral grin crossed over his face as Gato ordered his men to kill anybody on the bridge, the leaf shinobi included. In milliseconds, Naruto was on the bridge facing down the horde of weapon-wielding men, each itching for a good fight. Seconds later, Gaara joined him in a swirl of sand, looking equally annoyed at the small tyrant as Naruto was. Gato considered the two newcomers warily, eyeing up Gaara's forehead protectors curiously, wondering how he had attracted the attention of the three of the great shinobi village's attention. He shrugged it off and casually ordered his men to carry out their original orders, the eradication of all witnesses. It proved his downfall as he suddenly felt a tightening sensation around his neck. He could only look down far enough to see the thin coil of quickly hardening sand that was currently wrapped around his pudgy throat. He was slowly lifted high into the air by that same stream of sand, stopping the attacking bandits in their tracks. They all stared incredulously at their employer as his life slowly drained out in front of them, before staring with a mixture of awe and fear at the source of the sand, namely Gaara. He had his hand raised like he was holding chopsticks. At this point, at this disposition, a dispassionate look in his cold, expressionless eyes. With a flick of his wrist, Gato's head jerked violently before the sand released him, and he dropped lifeless to the ground, a warning to the approaching men, a warning they unfortunately paid no heed to. The remaining mercenaries were quickly dispatched in a display showing why shinobi were the people to go to for proper jobs. Tazuna was once again forced to watch as men were heartlessly slaughtered, faring no better than if they were unarmed civilians to the two Jinchuriki. He understood it was in his own protection, but it didn't make it any less gruesome to watch. Luckily, it was quick, and before long, Naruto and Gaara were throwing their lifeless bodies over the bridge into the reddening waters below. Naruto was stopped from this activity by a violent coughing fit somewhere behind him. He turned to see Zabuza had awoken, but was in terrible shape. With a precursory glance, Naruto knew he wouldn't make it yet. He was still clawing his way across the ground. His massive sword was discarded behind him as he used what little energy was left in his legs to slowly inch his way towards Haku's lifeless body. Naruto approached, curious as to his strange behavior. From what he had gleaned in their short encounter, Haku was little more than a tool to Zabuza. The real Kirin suddenly looked up at Naruto, coughing out to Haku's name and motioning with a silent plea from his eyes towards her body. Knowing this to be the last request of a dying fellow shinobi, Naruto complied as best he could. He picked Zabuza's weightless form up by the shoulders and half carried him over to where his apprentice and surrogate son lay, a pool of bright red slowly spilling out from his body. With his final burst of energy in his body, he tore away from Naruto's hold and painfully limped the rest of the way to Haku's lifeless form before collapsing once again, uncaring of his apprentice's blood soaking his clothing. He stayed alive just long enough to croak out his true feelings to Haku's deaf ears, wishing the boy he loved a better life in the next one, before the life finally left his eyes, leaving a melancholy smile forever imprinted on his face. Naruto couldn't help but be moved as he watched the emotional display from the otherwise cold, dispassionate man. It reminded him of his fears on how Gara might have been if Naruto and Takuya hadn't been there for him. However, at the same time, it reminded him of the good that existed in everybody, waiting for an opportunity to be released. Unfortunately for some, that chance doesn't make itself known until the very end, and Haku paid the price for it, never hearing how he was more than just a tool, but actually had somebody who cared for him. Before the other ninja could awaken or Tazada could come out of his shock long enough to question them, Naruto and Gaara quickly fled, the bodies of Zabuza and Haku with them. Naruto also sealed away the man's large sword, sure that if he got the chance he could return it to Kirigakure. Their mission here was complete, and after they buried the bodies of Zabuza and Haku side by side, they left the land of the waves. Naruto smirked as he remembered just how mad Taiya had been after that day, feeling left out from all the fun. Even more so, she was curious about the impact the missing nin and his apprentice had on Naruto. Their lives struck him so deeply as Haku's story was so similar to his own, leaving his village due to persecution and finding companionship and purpose. He never told anybody this, but Naruto had made a vow that day to always strive to protect those closest to him, as in Haku's own words, when a person has something important they want to protect, that's when they can become truly strong. Coming out of his dazed recollection, he stared at the silvery-haired man across from him, who was also rubbing his head in annoyance. Naruto stood up, a decidedly apologetic look on his face as he walked over and offered his hand to the man. He took it instinctively without even looking and allowed Naruto to haul him to his feet. Kakashi finally looked around at his assailant and did a double take. Sensei, Naruto, always his coherent and articulate self, managed to get out a single word. Huh? Kakashi peered closer for a moment and noticed the boy in front of him was not in fact the man his confused brain did originally mistake him for. Sorry about that. I guess I was distracted. Kakashi mumbled off a similar apology, never breaking his gaze away from Naruto's face. I started to get slightly weirded out by how the man was acting. Naruto backed up a bit. He had to get to the Inusaka compound before long and didn't have time to stand around talking. Well, I gotta go. Sorry again. Naruto reached down for the book he had dropped and took off again, while Kakashi just watched him leave, book in one hand once again. A tiny tear slid its way out of his visible upturned eye, dampening his ever-present mask slightly. I'm so proud. His mask stayed glued in that ridiculous manner as he took off with more vigor than usual, headed straight in the direction of the Hokage's building. He was now determined to get some answers, and when it concerned his late sensei and his legacy, Kakashi Hatake, son of the White Fang of Konoha, wasn't going to take no for an answer. Naruto had sprinted to the compound, wanting to make up for the lost time his collision had cost him. It still didn't even leave him panting as he rounded the corner and neatly smacked into a certain feral boy and his canine companion. Both teens were sent backwards as Naruto made his second collision of the night. Hey, watch it! Kiba didn't exactly look happy as he stood up, rubbing his head and moving to pick Akarama back up. Hey, you're that guy from before. Naruto, right? Naruto stood up, rubbing the same spot as his brush with Kakashi, the same apologetic look on his features. Oh, sorry about that. And it's Naruto. Naruto's a girl's name. He chuckled, catching Kiba off guard with his light-hearted nature. Most people found Kiba to be irritable and took offense to most of what he said when suitably irritated, which didn't take much. He noticed Naruto's outstretched hand and, after a moment of hesitation, grasped it. Kiba, the dog riding the dog riding on in the top of his coat, yipped loudly, somewhat annoyed at being left out of the greetings. Oh, and this is Akamaru. Naruto smiled, scratching the small puppy behind the ears, much to his obvious pleasure as he leaned into the contact. Huh, he seems to like you. Doesn't usually warm up to people so quickly. Naruto just rubbed the back of his head with the hand that wasn't occupied with stroking Akamaru. Yeah, animals just seem to like me, I guess. He ignored the throat chuckle from inside his head. Hannah would love you. She always has problems with animals that get uncomfortable in her clinic. Seeing Naruto's blank expression, he chuckled and quickly clarified. Hannah's my sister. She runs the vet practice in our in our compound. Except lately she keeps complaining about not getting assigned a getting team. Suddenly Kiba looked curiously at Naruto like he had just remembered something important. What are you doing all the way out here anyway? The Nusa compound's right on the edge of the village. Naruto wasn't sure how to explain that Kiba's mother had invited him and his teammate to stay with him until the tuning exams were over, and were right out of the blue. Actually, now that he thought about it, that sounded all right. Your mom invited me and my teammates to stay in your compound until the tuning exams are over. Kiba raised a brow quizzically, the sight almost making Naruto laugh. Huh, stay with us. Why? Naruto tried to suppress the devilish grin that attempted to appear on his face. Truthfully, Kiba nodded, now extremely curious. Naruto just motioned with his hand for the Inuzaka to come closer. He did so, and Naruto motioned again. This repeated a few times as Kiba got closer and more curious until Naruto was right next to his ear. The suspense was really getting to him now as Naruto smiled devilishly. I have no idea. Kiba backed away from the strange blonde, a large drop of sweat comically hanging from the side of his head. Alright then, I guess I'll take you in. Naruto happily nodded, and despite the strangeness of the situation, Kiba found his good mood to be slightly infectious. Inside the compound, Naruto immediately noticed the copious amounts of open land, no doubt for the nindogs in training to practice or play in. Also, on every door there was a flap for dogs to enter, and they were all suspiciously large. Naruto saw why when he saw an Inuzaka clan member walking with their companion, which came up to their chest. Kiba barely even seemed to notice the abnormal size of the various dogs around him, and Naruto couldn't help but take a curious glance at Akamaru. He was currently small enough to ride around atop Kiba's head. Would he grow to be that large as well? Naruto shrugged it off as it didn't concern him right now. Anyway, they were walking through the door into one of the larger buildings that were sparsely spread around the compound. Immediately, the smell of dogs and wet fur washed over Naruto's senses, almost making him gag from the power of it. He managed to hold it in to not seem rude and quickly adjusted to the overpowering smell. He was sure by now that even if he didn't have a nose that could catch a rabbit half a mile away, it would still be strong. Suddenly, three large dogs that looked suspiciously more like wolves rushed past him through the doggy flap in the door he and Kiba had entered through. They were quickly followed by a young woman, maybe 3 or 4 years older than Naruto and Kiba. She had the same clan markings as Kiba and Tsumi and the same general scent of animals, yet hers seemed to be more diverse. From that, he took a wild guess that this was the Hannah that Kiba mentioned before, and the variety of smells was from working with animals all day. She appeared remarkably less feral than the other Inuzakas Naruto had met, lacking the shaggy hair and slitted eyes. She wore a collared white medic coat, but Naruto couldn't see what she wore underneath. Suddenly, Naruto felt slightly awkward as to why he had even thought that in the first place, but shook his head of it when Hana turned to look at the two of them. Hey Kiba, have you seen Mom? Kiba just shook his head. Nah, I was actually looking for her myself. At that moment, as if her ears had been burning, or more likely, she was sneezing up a storm. Tizumi appeared around the corner. Ah, Naruto, you're here. Good. Your friend showed up earlier and said you would be coming later. She looked across at Kiba. Oh, even better, you've met my son. She then looked at Naruto's other side. And my daughter, it would seem. She smirked, showing off her elongated canines that matched Naruto's own when he showed them. It seems like I'm missing out on a family reunion. And Kiba took that opportunity to voice his most pertinent and eloquent question. Mom, who is this guy? Naruto looked across at him, smirking at him. He couldn't fault the boy for his directness. Tizunumi, on the other hand, seemed to expect the reaction completely and even seemed prepared for it. The village hidden in the sand are our allies, Kiba. I thought it would be nice to let them stay somewhere more comfortable than those dingy barracks the outside teams normally get. Kiba still seemed suspicious, but relented under his mother's gaze. Pack, men, pack, man, pack mentality was strong here, and it was obvious who the alpha of the house was. Hana only seemed amused by the answer, smirking at her brother's submissive look. Well, it was nice meeting you, Naruto. And she made a move to follow the dogs that had run past earlier, but Tsunami caught her hand as she went by. Hana, would you be so kind as to show our friends to the guest quarters? The younger woman eyed her mother curiously, looking for a reason behind the request in her monochrome eyes. She nodded slowly, and Tizunumi smiled happily, with only a hint of her usual animalistic qualities. Naruto hesitantly walked over to Hana and tried his best to smile, but the sheer awkwardness of the whole situation turned it into more of a lopsided grin. Hana just sighed and made a motion with her hand for him to follow her. However, once they were out of earshot of her family, a long distance thanks to another of their canine qualities, she struck up a conversation. So any idea why mom's taken such a shine to you? Naruto just shook his head, shrugging and looking a little lost. So, what's the sand like? I've been on a few tracking missions, but none into Wind Country. Naruto chuckled with genuine humor. It's hard to describe, but I think dry and hot best sums it up. Hana shared his smile as they walked out of the hut and across more open land. Naruto finally gathered the nerve to ask the question that had been bugging him for a while. So, why do you guys use actual dogs as opposed to summons? Hana just looked at him like the answer was so obvious the question wasn't even worth asking. Easy. Summons are good and all, but nothing beats the bond we Inusakas develop with our companions. She smirked. Let me demonstrate. She pulled back the sleeve on her shirt and revealed a small seal on her shoulder shaped suspiciously like a whistle. She bit her thumb and smeared some of the blood across the seal, and before Naruto knew it, a high-pitched whistle emanated from her shoulder. It was so high that it caused Naruto to drop to the ground, with his hands clutched over his ears in pain. Once the ringing in his ears stopped and his hearing returned, he stood back up, cowering a little while Hana looked at him with part curiosity and part shock. A little warning. Next time would be nice, he tried to say jokingly, but the fact that he was wincing, still clutching an ear, took away some of its humor. Sorry about that. Humans aren't supposed to be able to hear it. It's specifically tuned to our canines, so even the other dogs can. Again, she stared at him, intrigued by the strange reaction to her calling seal. Naruto just looked sheepishly at the ground, even as the three dogs Hana had been chasing before bounded over. Don't worry about it. My ears are just a little sensitive. Hana smiled, but on the inside she was still rifled with curiosity over the strange boy. Sensitive. You can say that again. That call was over 40,000 hertz. They walked the rest of the way to the guest quarters in silence, both of them completely forgetting that Hana had been about to show him something. The dogs, which Naruto was now sure were in fact wolves, bounded along quite happily behind them, tongues lolling out. Hana led him inside, where he was suddenly tackled to the ground by a red blur. Coming out of his daze, he looked up at Tayuya's angry face. Her eyes were trying unsuccessfully to burn through his forehead with her sheer willpower alone. He just continued to look up at her with his normal cocky grin that he knew would drive her insane. What the fuck, shithead? You said you were right behind us. Why the hell were you half an hour late? Naruto shrugged from his position beneath her, trying to fight off a strange sensation that was suddenly coming over him. Seeing his oldest friend from this angle, the fact that her warm thighs were straddling his chest wasn't helping at all. He really needed her to get off of him before. She's trying to say she was worried. Gaara's voice ripped through the awkward tension that had arisen, and Naruto looked up at Tayuya bemused, while she turned away from him to hide her flushed cheeks. Like hell I was, Sandy. I just don't like being left out of the loop. The fact that she wouldn't look at Naruto as she said that at least confirmed Gaara's statement. It brought a smile to his face. It always felt nice to be missed. Not that he enjoyed making people miss him, of course, but the sentiment was still there. Uh, you can get off me now. She was still blushing and trying not to look at him. Not even realizing the compromising position she had put them in, she suddenly leaped back and quickly walked into one of the rooms behind them. Gaara threw an amused look between them as Tayuya stormed off before he too retired. Hana, on the other hand, was just barely holding in her laughter after watching the whole awkwardness but hilarious affair. She didn't say anything though, and with only one last look behind her at the odd trio, she walked out of the building. Naruto heard her laughter echo away into the night and was slightly disgruntled. She would find amusement in situations like that. He walked into Tayu's room, puzzling out the strange feeling he had when she was startling him, but not coming to any conclusion. He shrugged and climbed into bed behind her. She didn't say a word, but allowed him to wrap his hand around her waist, and after a few minutes she nuzzled back into his body, all their problems forgotten. Every morning was a blank canvas between the two of them. They had no secrets and no arguments that would carry over. It was just how they were together. Some might have called it an odd relationship to share with a friend, but neither of them would trade it for anything. End of chapter 12.